This is the GKD Pixel 2, and it might be my new pocket friend. So let's take a look at it and see if it's worth the price that it costs. Quick note, this unit was sent to me by Mech DIY. Big thanks to them for sending this out. They don't get to see my video. They didn't pay me any money. The only consideration I'm getting is just the value of this device that they sent me for free. But I'm going to be honest with this and look at this as if I paid the full retail price for it when making a determination if this is one I want. Again, huge shout out to Mech DIY for sending this over to me. More about them later. So jumping right in, this is one of the new contenders on the scene in the pocketable handheld space. It has a premium metal shell. I'm guessing it's aluminum with a purple finish on this one. It comes in a few other colors and I'll show you those in a moment. And it's just really small and pocketable and feels really nice for what it is, but it is a little bit pricier than some of the other small handhelds available in this space. So let's take a look at it, see if it's worth that extra price tag for the metal and if it can displace something else like the TrimUI Brick, Miu Mini, etc. that you might already own. So I've got it here in the metallic purple color, but it also comes in a dark gray metallic, a red metallic, and a green metallic. It seems that there's also a metallic blue that is available for pre-order right now. And there was a special edition yellowish goldish one, but I think that one is sold out at this point, and I'm not sure if there's any plans to restock it. And what you see is what you get here, a nice little handheld. Let's take a quick tour. On the back here, we do have a little lanyard hole, so that's kind of cool. And then of course on the front, you've got all your standard buttons, start, select, face buttons, and D-pad. On the top, you've got L1, L2, R2, and R1. These are of course digital buttons, but they're placed pretty decently. On the bottom, you've got your Type-C port for charging and data, and a headphone jack, which is nice to see. We've got our volume on the left here, as well as our TF card slot. And then on the right, we have a mode button that can be used to interact with like the RetroArch menu, etc. And then the power button. And one really cool thing that I haven't seen on other handhelds is this is the battery indicator, and it actually indicates the life remaining out of 100%. So right now I'm at 95% and all 4 bars are full. But as we use the handheld, these will slowly deplete. So it does give you a quick glance at the battery life, even if you're in a game or somewhere that the meter isn't displayed. So that's kind of cool. And yeah, so that is kind of the device in a nutshell. It is really feeling quite good in the hand though. It's maybe not ergonomically the best, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but it is very premium. I don't really have any doubts. You know, it might get a little scratched up, but it'll just add some character to it. And you can get a small screen protector if you're worried about the screen. So I definitely think this is something you could potentially slip in a pocket without being in a case. But even if you did put it in a little sleeve, it wouldn't take up a ton of space. That being said, what does that cost you? Well, the price on Mech DIY is $89.99, but there is currently a coupon code that you can use, which will get it down to $79.20 US. And that does include shipping and any fees or something like that, which despite this video being kind of sponsored by Mech DIY in the sense that they sent this to me, they didn't pay me any money to say nice things about them, but I think that is actually currently the cheapest price. I did look on AliExpress and a lot of them were close to $100 with import fees included. And you can get this on Amazon if you're impatient and get it in a couple days, but it is $90 there. So that depends on whether, you know, saving $10 is worth waiting a couple weeks instead of getting it in a couple days. That's going to be up to you. But yeah, check out the link down in the description. If you use that link, it helps me out a little bit on this channel just to make a couple pennies off of you purchasing one. But yeah, check it out. You know, shop competitively, get the best price you can. But I think right now that is actually on Mech DIY. So we're looking at about $80 best price for this handheld, which, you know, if you compare it to something like the TrimUI Brick, you know, I think this was a little bit more on launch, but it can be found on sale, I think, for closer to 50 or so now. And, you know, Muse, etc., you can find for cheaper than this $80 price. But this isn't metal, although there's a metal version of the TrimUI Brick coming out right now, and it is considerably bigger. You know, let's take a quick moment to look at those sizes. I already considered the Brick quasi-pocketable, but the GKD Pixel is just even that much more pocketable. You can see it's even thinner than the thickest part of the Brick, considerably shorter, and a decent amount narrower. So both pocketable, but this is extra pocketable. Do lose a little bit of screen size, and more on that later, but yeah, this is pretty cool for what you get for the price. Before we jump into controls, I wanted to just do a couple quick notes on the UI and the OS and navigating and some nitpicks there, and then we'll jump over to testing out all the controls. You'll notice that it's kind of organized into a arcade, handheld, and console misspelled there for the apps. And it's as you'd expect. You've got things like Super Nintendo, Genesis, etc. Here under the handheld, you get all of your handheld systems, Game Boy, etc. And then arcade, of course, you get your arcade games. That's fine. I mean, usually I'm used to a screen that has all of the systems on one screen, but I suppose it offers a little bit more organization. And then on the other here, you've got some ports, Pico 8, etc. there. And you can hit select, start. Oh, here, next page is where you get to the apps and the settings on the device. A couple things you can access there, RetroArch settings, etc. And then some settings. And you can even just boot into Emulation Station. So yeah, let me mention that. If you don't like the base UI that they provide here, you can boot into Emulation Station. And from there, you will get the classic look. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that so you can see what that looks like. Yep, and then here, like I mentioned before, having all the systems on one screen, that's what you get here. The Emulation Station you're used to. They have kind of a fun little CRT theme going on by default. So yeah, and I would maybe prefer this over the other one, although the box art isn't scraped here, but of course you can always set that up yourself. But let's just hop back into the default UI just for sake of the review today. Side note, this is OS based on Rocknix. It is unofficially based on it. It's not supported by Rocknix, and it's not the newest version of Rocknix, but it does have Rocknix underneath the hood here. So most of the features you might be used to that should be present here. One thing I'll notice about the stock UI is the navigation is inconsistent. So from here, I use the A button to go forward, the B button to go back. And then once I get into the game list, if I hit the B button, it's no longer back. It's now going up the folder hierarchy, and you actually have to hit start to exit. When you're on these screens, if you hit start, does it bring you back? No, it changes the icon size. So it's just a little weird having to remember whether you're here to hit B to go back or whether you are needing to hit start to go back. Little weird, little nitpick about the stock OS, and that is sort of solved by using Emulation Station. But if you buy this and pick it up and just want to play it out of the box and you don't poke around, that's what you're going to be met with. So I do always like to talk about the vanilla experience, since honestly, 80% of people, that's probably all they're going to experience. There are custom firmware options coming out for this. I think there's Plum OS and some other things in the works. We don't have official support on everything yet, but I'm sure we'll see more as time goes on. And this is based on the RK3326 chipset, so it's not an unknown quantity there. So support should be decent for it as more people use it. Okay, so now that we've talked about the UI and navigating through it, let's go ahead and jump into a game to test out the controls. Okay, so as far as the controls go on this, I found them to be pretty decent. I did find that maybe the buttons and the D-pad were a little bit more proud than I'd like. Let's see if I can get that in focus. They do stick out from the shell a decent amount, and they have a fair amount of travel to them. But when you push them down, they're almost flush to the shell for the face buttons. D-pad not quite as much, but the D-pad still has quite a considerable amount of travel. They're all membrane, and I don't mind the actuation feel. I don't have like a specific issue with the controls necessarily. I just find that the travel is maybe a bit more than I would like. And I don't think putting aftermarket shorter buttons will work, because then they'll go too far into the shell. So that being said, I still found them perfectly fine to use, and for the type of games I'm playing on here, it's not necessarily super intense, but just keep that in mind. The D-pad can also completely sink in if you press it on the center. It'll still work, but yeah, as far as false diagonals, yeah, it's pretty good. I'm not moving up and down too much unless I really hammer it, so I think that it's a relatively accurate D-pad. Again, my main gripe is just kind of how much it sticks up and how much travel there is. Whether or not that bothers you will be individual. And, you know, like I said, I was playing games on this and it didn't really bother me. It's just something that I initially noticed and wanted to take note of that for all of you. Start and select or click either down here on the bottom. Perfectly fine, easy to access, no issue there. And then, of course, our bumper buttons are up here on the top. They're all quite clicky, but not loud clicky, so they shouldn't be too annoying to other people in the room. Obviously, it's a little harder to hit the R2 and L2 than the others, but you know, it's fine. So how does it feel to hold and play that? Well, I find myself gripping it like this if I need triggers, which honestly with the games I'm playing on here is not very often. So you can do this and more or less can support it and reach those buttons up at the top. And if I'm just playing a simple game, I just play it like a tiny little Game Boy here with no triggers and move it around. It can be a little more cramped this way because your thumbs have to kind of go down like that versus holding it out like this, but it really just comes down to the game you're going to play. I think about talking about ergonomics on something so small is kind of silly. I know there's probably going to be some people out there that design some enormous 3D printed grip that goes on the bottom, but to me that kind of defeats the point of having this little pocketable, svelte little thing. Side note, I do feel a little bit of warmth after navigating around. I think that's a consequence of having a metal shell. It's not that the device necessarily runs hotter than something with a plastic shell, you just feel it more transferring through the metal. Anyways, in the hand, it feels just fine. Now, compared to something like the TrimUI brick, I would say that yes, the brick does have better ergonomics because it's larger, you can rest your fingers on this ridge on the back, and you can hold it both ways. It's got a bit more of a chin to hold on to. Yeah, it just feels better. So I think if you're gonna do an extended play session but still want a small device, it might make more sense to have the brick. Still one of my favorite small handhelds to this date, despite all the other things that have come out. I even prefer this over clamshells. I don't have a ton of clamshell nostalgia like some people do, but that being said, yeah, this is gonna be a better ergonomic experience. Not to say that this is bad, but it is just small. But if you want something you can just toss in your car, in your bag, in your pocket, and have it with you all the time, then the Pixel 2 does represent a much smaller and more compact, package. Like, just see this in my hands. And of course, you don't necessarily know how big my hand is, so I'll just show my phone here for reference. This is an iPhone 15 Pro Max compared to these two handhelds. You can see where we were looking at size. They're both smaller than a modern flagship phone in your pocket, but the Pixel 2 noticeably more. Let's go ahead and jump into talking about the screen and the sound. The screen is nice and bright, and let me get into a game that's a little bit more exciting than this one in terms of the colors. So the screen on here is a 2.4 inch screen. I believe the brick is 3.2 inch, and most of your standard retro handhelds are 3.5 inches, like the majority of the Anbernic XX series line. So this is an inch smaller, so it is considerably smaller. So keep that in mind. You might be squinting a little bit if your eyes aren't great at seeing things up close. So keep that into consideration. It is small, comes with the territory, but physical limitations here. We can't put a bigger screen in something that is this small in your pocket. So that being said, 640 by 480 is super crisp at this size. There's been past handhelds that cheaped out with like 320 by 240, or maybe the screens just weren't available at that time, which doesn't look super great, although not real honestly that terrible at this small of a size. But 640 by 480 is a really high PPI at the screen size, so I will never have any issues with clarity on here. And as you can see, the colors are relatively bright and clear. And let's get a close up here. The clarity is good, no issues here. You might see a little bit of artifacting just from the camera, but that's no fault of the handheld. It is a very crisp display, really no issues at all. And it gets reasonably bright. I don't even have it at its brightest here because of the camera. You can see it gets quite bright to blow out the camera highlights. And then as far as dimness, it doesn't get super dim compared to some screens. So maybe late night viewing isn't the perfect experience, but I don't really think this is a late night handheld. If I'm kicking back on the couch, I'm using something a little bigger. This is something that I might use outside at a park or something like that. And I think that use case, it is better. We were actually playing Pokemon Pinball. I actually got my wife to play a game for once at the park the other day while my kid was playing on the playground, and you could have no issue seeing the screen in, kind of a mottled shade area for outdoors. So screen, I really have no complaints. I think it's an excellent screen. Let's talk about sound a little bit, and we'll turn it up here real quick. So I have it maxed out right now, and my microphone is right here off camera to my right a little bit, and speakers down here. So as you can tell, it's not super loud. I've got it maxed up. I'm easily able to overcome the volume. Totally loud enough indoors in a super noisy environment might get lost, but honestly, I don't really enjoy having handhelds cranked to crazy volumes. I'm gonna hold this up to the mic so you can get a little bit better sound profile. So as you can hear, it's reasonably clear and crisp. I don't really hear any harsh frequencies or anything like that. So I think the sound is just fine for a retro handheld. It is down firing, but I don't find that to be too big of an issue. If anything, it helps cut out high frequencies when it's not blasted straight into your eardrums. So I would say that the sound is perfectly acceptable for a handheld of this caliber. So that being said, last thing we can talk about is just actually playing games. You can see here Super Nintendo looks great, no problems there, and we already played a Game Boy Color game during the controls section. So as far as performance, I don't think you should buy this if you're gonna try to push high-end stuff. That's not the point of this device. That being said, you can perfectly happily play up to PlayStation on this handheld without any issues. I think the enhanced resolution, the 2x resolution mode, started to slow down for a little bit for me when I was playing Tony Hawk the other day. But I think overall, 1x resolution is fine at this screen size. You're not really going to notice any pixels or anything like that unless you're like got it right up against your eyeballs, and then you probably wouldn't be able to focus on it. So here is Tony Hawk on here, playing just fine on the Pixel 2. It's actually got a rumble motor in here. I don't know if I mentioned that already. It can be a little bit annoying at times, but it is kind of fun to have a little bit of feedback sometimes in the games. And I'm playing terribly as I'm talking here. But yeah, as you can see, PlayStation is totally playable and probably the limit of what I'd play on here. It can theoretically play some Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast, but not all of it. And the control mapping isn't going to be optimal since those systems had joysticks and additional buttons on them that are not offered by the inputs that we have here. So PlayStation, I think, is happily the top end of what you want to do here. Sega Saturn's going to have some frame skipping issues, not going to really run full speed. So yeah, PlayStation and down is where you're going to want to be with this one. I think obviously things like Game Boy Color are a really great fit for this because of the size of the device and those games being designed with a similar size screen on the devices originally. I mean, if we take my original Game Boy here, you can see that the screen sizes aren't that much different. And this has an IPS screen that's slightly bigger than a stock screen on a Game Boy DMG. So let's fire up the same game just for giggles here. So here's a slightly enhanced Game Boy DMG screen size versus the Pixel 2. They're pretty close. Again, I mentioned that this screen is a bit bigger than the stock screen on the DMG by a couple tenths of an inch, I believe. But for games like this that were on the original Game Boy or Game Boy Color, this Pixel 2 just looks awesome. And as you can see, there's even this like faux power button and pixel grid overlay, which make them honestly look pretty similar. They look pretty cool. So I think Game Boy is maybe the best case for the Pixel 2, but of course Super Nintendo, Genesis, and a sprinkling of PlayStation are totally acceptable on this handheld as well. So yeah, those are the kind of systems that you're going to want to play on here. Again, you're not going to want to play anything that's super text heavy, you know, like an RPG on PlayStation might be getting kind of hard to read the stuff, especially if you don't have perfect vision. But again, it's freaking tiny. So what are you going to do about it? You can go bigger and then, you know, go ahead and go get a brick. If you want even a little bit bigger than a brick, go get an RG35XX or something like that, a Mini Plus, or some other new Anbernic if you want a 4-inch screen. You know, really just comes down to your preference. But this is just sort of maybe the new king of pocketability. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about the game performance, is that it is perfectly acceptable for a handheld of this size. Related to performance, I did want to talk really quickly about battery life. I did do some testing with this. And so we were playing Pokemon Pinball and on Game Boy Color, which does have some vibration. And on that one, I got, extrapolating out the battery loss while playing it for about an hour, about 3 hours and 20 minutes. So that's going to be like your average battery life is 3 hours or so on this device, which is definitely not exceptional. Exceptional, that's not a word. Exceptional. But again, this is a small device. It's only got an 1800 milliamp hour battery, so it's not going to blow any endurance contests out of the water. You know, something like the Brick is going to get way, way, way more battery life. So extended play sessions, ergonomics, battery, etc., you're going to want to go with a Brick, a Mini Plus, an RG35XX, etc. That's not who this is for. This is for bite-sized gaming. This is put it in your purse, put it in your pocket, bring it to the park, you know, play some rounds of Pokemon Pinball while your kid is playing on the playground, or you're in line at Costco, whatever it may be that you're doing, that's what this is for. So around 3 hours. As far as sleep, that's actually something that's pretty exceptional on this device. So, but just by tapping power, not by shutting down the system, not by putting it to a full like standby or anything like that. Like it's still just regular sleep where I can wake it up immediately. After one day, the battery percentage meter didn't really drop at all, so hard to tell. But then I left it for 2 weeks. From the 21st of June until the 7th of July, I went from 85% to 45% battery. So in 2 weeks, I lost 40% battery, which is actually pretty great. That means that you can go a month or more before this dies while not being turned off. That's not turned off, that's on, and in sleep you can go an entire month. So if you only play this once a week and just tap the power button and forget about turning it off, it's still gonna have juice. But of course there are settings on the device that you can have it turn off automatically. I believe, where did that go? Device, and you can enable auto power off and a 10-minute timer, and then the battery will last more or less forever and standby. So yeah, battery standby and sleep is really good on the device. So that's one area that I think that it does excel. It's just going to not last that long during actual gameplay. But if you're going to play this thing for 3 hours straight, you're going to have some serious finger cramps. And yeah, I think that about sums up everything I have to say about the GKD Pixel 2 today. It is a very attractive device. It's very handsome, very pretty. It looks premium. You know, it is way nicer build quality than a lot of other handhelds that you see these days. The button feel is overall pretty good, if the travel might be a little bit too much, with the buttons being a little too proud. And the triggers perfectly acceptable. Ergonomics are fine considering the size. I actually think putting the triggers up here is better than down here, because if you're playing a game that needs those, you can kind of support the whole device and space out your thumbs, because like this can get a little bit more cramped. I wouldn't advise necessarily holding it like that unless you have tiny fingers. So finish and feel, great. The games it can play, the performance on top, totally fine. The OS, kind of wonky. To be honest, if you're just playing games, it doesn't really matter, and you can still access RetroArch settings and tweak your shaders and overlays to your heart's content on this. So that's really not an issue at all. The functionality is all there, just kind of some weird navigation, spelling errors, etc. But putting something like Plum OS on here probably resolves that. And then the last thing, again, circling back to price, list price of $90, but you can have it for about $80, $90 if you want it on Amazon. Is it worth almost $100? Well, at $100 mark, you can probably get a handheld that performs a little better, maybe play some more Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast. You jump up to 150 and then the world really opens up. You can get an RP4 Pro, which can pretty much play everything, GameCube, PS2, and below, which obviously this is definitely not going to do. But for just under $100, I don't know. I don't know if I would get this over the brick personally. I might just stick with the brick because it fits in my pocket fine as it is and has a bit bigger screen. Still has good build quality overall. The buttons are micro switch instead of dome switch instead of membrane, so that comes down to feel. These are a bit more clicky and tactile, where these are your more standard mushy membrane feel. So yeah, kind of a toss up here. You can also get the brick from Mech DIY if you're interested, or many other places. Same discount code applies. But for the Pixel, I don't know. I do not think I would personally buy this with my own money because I'm already pretty happy with the brick. But now that I have it, I would be tempted to replace the brick with it as my everyday handheld, because these aren't handhelds that I spend a ton of hours playing on. I usually play bigger handhelds when I want to sit down for extended sessions. These are the throw it in your pocket, play at the park kind of thing. And for that, this is actually really awesome and takes up less space in my bag when I'm going out and bringing the kid places. So I don't know. I'm kind of divided on this. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about it. Do you think it's worth having the smaller and the metal finish over something like the brick or Miu Mini Plus, which is already a tried and true Pocket Pal that has a bit bigger screen? I don't know. I think it's just going to come down to personal preference. It's not like it's the end of the world to spend $20 more to get the metal and smaller handheld if those things are important to you. So I think it still represents a fair value for what it's charged. I think another $10, $15 cheaper, I would recommend it to everybody. At this price, it's not a bad price. It's just a price that you should pay if this is the kind of thing you're looking for. If this is not the device you're looking for, don't rush out to buy it just because of FOMO and to have it. But I guess that logic can apply to pretty much every handheld I review. I never tell you that you have to go buy something. I just tell you whether I'd personally buy it and who it might be for. Anyways, I've been rambling long enough at this point. GKD Pixel 2, do I recommend it? Yes, for the right person. It's a fun handheld. The battery life's a little bit short. The UI is a little bit wonky. It's got excellent sleep. It feels great in the hands. If that makes sense to you, then yes, I recommend it. And that's all I got for today. Have a good one.